Something very, very personal right at the bat. It's kind of sad. We just heard about one of our friends, fellow investigators on the project. Robin Bellamy is now in hospice, and Robin was a very, very important component of our project a couple of years ago. In fact, she came down from Canada with her husband a couple of years ago. Even though she was very, very sick, she got dressed up in Victorian clothes and did some performances, some scenarios that we did a reenactment in the hotel. So we really miss her, and we hope the best for her. And we're really, really sorry to hear that now she's in hospice. Well, she's been suffering for a long time, so I hope she will see something better soon. And I also would like to mention another one of our investigators, Herman Mike Stevenson, who did a lot of our tech work, context specific tech work at the hotel. And a little over a year ago, about 2 years ago, he was on a live radio show when all of a sudden they heard him gasp and having problems breathing. And by the time we got to him, he had already passed right on the floor during the live performance. So I would like to dedicate this project to those two very, very important individuals in our life during this Staging Afterlife Project, Robin Bellamy and Herman Mike Stevenson, who we call Benjamin Franklin because he was a really whiz with context-specific technology, and he looked a lot like Benjamin Franklin. So I just wanted to begin with that. This is the first part of the Staging Afternoon project that I was going to present. It's going to get more meat to it when I talk about it at the conference. It's kind of hard to summarize it because, I don't know, I guess you can't see this, but I have the book that I wrote. Oh, there it is over there. It's 286 pages of an introduction to how we are analyzing, how we are going to gather information and use that information to do some investigations at the springs from a different approach. So this first part that what I'm going to talk about today is sort of a information gathering about what we are doing. And then when we go to ASSAP and I give the talk at ASSAP, I'm going to give a more in-depth approach to specific techniques that we're using at the springs. But again, it's just a preliminary analysis of the first phase of the project, which is limiting itself to the Victorian / Edwardian, late Victorian / Edwardian period in the hotel's occupational history. So we're talking about just the layer of presence from 1880 through 1910 in the history of the hotel's occupancy. We are working within other layers like the World War I layer, the World War II layer, and even back to the Native American presence layer, because outside the springs, the reason why the hotel is there is because there were 8 mineral springs that people said provided a lot of important health benefits by taking the water from those springs. So we have Native American presence who had the first initial contact with these springs that dates back centuries before the European occupation that built the hotel in 1804. So we got a lot of different layers of different types of presences that potentially could be returning as former guests or former people who once occupied that landscape in time. But the initial project, as we are now focused, is on the late Victorian Edwardian era, specifically 1800 to 1910. So to go through some of the data information, I'm going to read some, and then I'm going to put up some bullet points about how we are going about the information gathering, how we have gathered that information, how we are using it, and how it tells us something about a different approach to a typical paranormal investigation that is largely contemporary tech-based. We don't use any contemporary technological tools in our investigations. We're always context specific to the period of time in history that we are working with. And in that period from 1880 to 1910, specifically, the use of the camera was extremely important. So the only tech equipment besides hidden audio microphones that we have when we get dressed in time period costumes and use time period activities, the only thing that would be visible would be the camera. And former guests from the Victorian and Edwardian era knew and loved to be photographed. So we were using that as a sort of cue for anybody who may be there to when we take photographs, we do get individuals in these cameras, and we have identified some of those individuals based on historical photographs that are distributed throughout the hotel from that same period, the 1880s to the 1910. So I'll talk about that in the beginning. But let me begin by saying the Staging Afternoon Project began gathering information about context-specific historical experiences of guests at a modern and luxurious hotel spa complex. Information is the key, and that word is defined as, quote, a difference that makes a difference, as anthropologist Gregory Bateson once said. So we're using information that would make a difference, that would make it different, and context-specific information that we could use in scenarios when we enact these scenarios. And if we would get any response to that scenarios, it would be related to the context-specific information we are gathering at the hotel. So regarding this information quest, we asked ourselves before beginning the following questions. The next slide, Mary. Okay, this is just part of the hotel, and it looks very, very well. It's very, very modern. And you have to your left in the photo and to the right in the photo large balconies that extend outward. So you have a very, very large hotel complex. You have an indoor swimming pool that looks very much like the Roman baths in Bath, very much so. So I'm going to show you some of those photos, not necessarily in this presentation, but when we are at ASSAP during that presentation there. So it has an indoor pool, and that indoor pool, it was considered the first indoor Olympic size for that time pool in the United States. And those historic photographs that you see that I'm going to show you distributed throughout the hotel were photographed by a woman photographer considered the first professional woman photographer in the United States. Her name was Ruth Bailey. So you got a lot of firsts happening at this hotel.
Inequality.
What? Is that?
I beg your pardon. I think somebody just didn't mute themselves there, but it's muted now. Sorry, carry on.
So anyway, let me go to those specific informative questions that we were asking ourselves before we began the investigation. The first one is impactful scientism, typical of many contemporary paranormal investigations with the extensive use of ghost tech devices and other measuring and recording devices. Is that really informative about the presence of past cultural beings haunting the present? So our focus as an anthropologist and archaeologist is the presence of past human beings who once inhabited that hotel in time. So it's a big difference between recording anomalies and environmental deviations and stuff like that. Our focus is away from those environmental deviations and tries to create a difference by looking at how people lived in the past, how people acted in the past, how their ideas of living in the past were, and see if we can use that as relative information in our investigations. So the second thing, which is very popular in contemporary paranormal investigations on American para TV programming, does edutainment make a difference? And we thought, well, it doesn't, because it's basically the same thing in all of these shows in the United States for the past 20 years. they basically do the same thing time and time again. And what you see on those shows, in every one of those shows from the past 20 years, during the broadcast, they always do the following. They walk around in the dark with their audio equipment and make non-context specific questions like, is there anybody here with us tonight? Could you show us a sign of your presence? Now, who would respond to that? Not a person who maybe has come back because they had a very unique experience at the hotel, because this is edutainment. It is not really a professional investigation. The third one, do anomalous visuals, sounds, and ambient measurements and readings make important differences as to whether a place is culturally haunted or not? The next one is doing the same or similar investigative practices at all haunted locations without regard to cultural and historical specificity, really informative and serious field work that provides relevant information about localized haunted phenomena that I call micro histories of cultural hauntings at particular places. And finally, we asked ourselves, is paranormal unity? That's every year you have a ghost hunting day that they put on Facebook and social media about, oh, everybody is going to do a paranormal investigation on that day. And usually those paranormal investigations are not culturally and historical specific. So what relevant information about localized haunting phenomena at particular sites in different locales and in different countries and during different times really make a difference, and just by calling it paranormal unity. Okay, so again, we were trying to get away from this idea. I don't know how prevalent any of these ideas are in normal TV programming in Great Britain or on the continent, but in the United States for 20 years, they're all basically the same. The only difference is they're using more and more and more tech equipment, none of which is relative to past cultural hauntings of specific human behaviors. So that's how we started that project. So the Staging Afternoon Project is meant to change the latitude and attitude of investigative work at haunted locations. So at the conference next week, I'm going to give you specific examples of that change in latitude. And when I say a change in latitude, I'm talking about a change from surface probes to digging down deep into different layers of experience and memory through time at the hotel. And the attitude is, again, a cultural, humanistic approach as opposed to a scientific or pseudoscientific physical approach. So I'm going to give you some specific examples of that when I talk about this project at the conference next week. So as an archaeologist, this project is a form of what archaeologist Sharon Lee Dottie calls profane archaeology, a kind of archaeological field work, but one that would offend the mainstream of archaeological thought and field practices, but not necessarily all contemporary archaeology or archaeologists. For example, in archaeology today, we have a sub-discipline called sensory archaeology, like Yanis Hamalikis' work in Greece, or Robin Skeet's work in Malta. And what we have is auditory archaeology of Steve Mills in Romania, and the theater/archaeological approach of Mike Pearson, a theatrical director, and Michael Shanks, an archaeologist. Even in the UK, many years ago, I have the 2 books on this TV program that used to show on TV in England called 2 Men in a Trench, Part 1 and Part 2, where archaeologists Tony Pollard and Neil Oliver would do reenactments at battlefield sites in Great Britain. So we kind of use a lot of these elements: sensory archaeology, auditory archaeology, theater and archaeology combined into what I call performance excavations, practice-based field work based on just something really way beyond reenactment. You're really getting into the character. And I use a lot of my theatrical background and my 2 years of taking method acting and performing in a lot of movies and TV shows and commercials, using that and we immerse ourselves into a particular time period, a particular layer of the hotel's past occupational history, and see, by resonating with those activities, the same activities that those former guests did, if we make contact, communicative contact with some of returning guests. And I'm gonna talk about that at the conference in next week. So what I'm saying is, what we are doing can be conceived as also a form of profane paranormal investigation, one that would be objectionable to the mainstream of paranormal pop culture. And I have presented at theoretical archaeology group conferences largely in the United States, at Berkeley and New York University, University of Chicago, University of Buffalo, University of Champaign, Illinois. And speaking about this approach in front of a group of theoretical archaeologists, people, they don't object to what I'm doing. In fact, some of them are actually doing parts of what I'm also doing. But if I attend a paranormal conference and talk about how this archaeological, ethnographic, theatrical approach to haunting phenomena, I almost get booed off the stage. They say, well, what does archaeology have to do with this? What does anthropology have to do with this? You mean you don't use a K2 meter? You mean you don't use this other ghost tech devices? And I say, no, I'm looking at it from a different perspective. A deceased, returning cultural being who had a particular vision of their world. And I'm trying to bring that vision back as a form of memory activism to see if anybody is still there who are part of that cultural world that we are enacting. Okay, so I've been doing this for more than 4 decades now. Something different and I believe informative about what relevant data should be gathered at a haunted location. If the goal of the investigation centers on the possibility of now dead cultural beings returning to one of the places they once occupied in life, rather than a haunting due to untimely death or unfinished circumstance as a form of negative presence or a negative haunting. At Bedford Springs, we are trying to unearth positive hauntings, revenant guests who come back because of the unique experiences that the hotel offered its guests through time, like the first indoor pool in the United States, like the importance of photography during the late 19th century, like the importance of other things, the importance of women during the Victorian era in America, which was very different than the Victorian woman's position in England. In the United States during the Victorian era, the women at the Springs controlled most of the activities that were performed at the Springs. The men followed the women. The men and the women did things together, and we have a lot of photographic evidence of that dual activity between both the men and the women doing the same activity. Such as bicycle riding, such as playing euchre in card games. So we, in the next stage of the investigation, we're going to reenact those performances, dress to dress, talk to talk. Don't introduce any new technologies besides the camera, which they are well familiar with. And all of that, we have 62 different guests from the Victorian, Edwardian era that appear in these historic photographs distributed throughout the hotel. We have their biographical data. So what I'm trying to do is use that biographical data, create scenarios that would resonate with their biographies. But first, I have to find their room numbers during a particular time. Once we get those room numbers, go to those rooms, do the enactment of some performances that would resonate with them, like the card games. based on their experiences and memories, and see if we get any responses using photography and hidden audio equipment. We've done some of these potentially, we did some of these originally. I did not know how to play euchre. And so we were going up to some of these rooms where they originally did play euchre. And since we didn't know how to play, we were just playing with the cards, but we didn't know how to play. And on the audio, we've got voices that appear to be kind of like angry about we weren't playing it correctly. And we got a noise like somebody pounding on the table in that audio. And we're looking at the table where we're playing the cards and nobody was pounding the table. So these are kind of teasers to see if, what we are doing, maybe creating a cue or maybe creating a memory of past experience of these particular guests who inhabited these rooms, and maybe they are responding. So we're just trying to test hypotheses at this stage. So this project is meant to gather information that provides temporal depth and the flow of presence across time. One directly related to a relationality between past cultural practices and material culture that creates a form of what is called socio-temporal order, a particular relationship between past cultural practices and the use of particular materiality. For example, the use of a camera in taking photographs of past guests in the Victorian era doing these activities like bicycle riding. That is creating a specific layer of socio-temporal order using specific activities and specific materiality, i.e. the camera as photographic pose, to see if we can reawaken the memory and experiences of past guests who may still come back to the hotel and who are not attached or embedded in that hotel because they drowned in the pool, or they had a heart attack and died in their room, or some unforeseen circumstance. I'm trying to see if we get positive results of a haunting rather than all the negativity that you see on all these TV shows, where every show that you see on, there's demons haunting this place, or that elevator was a portal to hell and things like that. I'm trying to see if I can get some positive results of still remembering experiences that were unique to the hotel and having revenant presence coming back because of those unique experiences. So the project has been ongoing now for a number of years, and it's still continuing, and it's humanistic as opposed to physical in nature. We are interested in materializations as a form of historical experience, a pastness that is manifesting on the present environment in either residual and or interactive form. This includes identifying the patina that a material pastness visually imprints on the contemporary setting, a pastness that may affect the memory of cultural beings and serve as an affordance for their return as a form of memory activism. Now, at Bedford Springs, next slide, Mary, that one right there. What you're going to see in the next slide, if it goes there, well, it's stuck. There. Oh, we lost it. Come on. Come on.
There we go.
These are what I call patina. Up on the upper left-hand corner, those are hotel ledgers of former residents, what they did here at the Springs and their room numbers. We have 4 dual staircases in the interior of the hotel. Very late Victorian, early Edwardian architecture that is still present in the hotel. We have historical furniture that is still there at the hotel. What you see here on the lower left was the original table of President James Buchanan, 1856 to 1860, who transmitted the first transatlantic cable in 1857 from that chair with a young Queen Victoria. that was the table that transmission was enacted on,
Until
on the lower left. And here's another dual staircase in the indoor pool. And here to the right, the lower right, are different photographs and different drawings of the past, the various past at the hotel. The hotel is full of this, what I call patina, the pastness of the past in the present. So we're using that patina in those locations with context-specific scenarios that occurred in those locations, and only using the technology that was known to them, not introducing new technology like all these ghost tech devices or EMF meters or any type of recording devices. We're trying to be context specific and see if we get communication with anybody who still may have come back, just using context specific practices and context specific technologies. So the project is about understanding objects, material culture as vibrant. And the way this vibrancy serves as a memory recall that may activate a form of memory activism, resulting in a haunting. This is a form of boundary thinness that we seek in the project. However, it is not one between past and present, time, nor life and death, presence, but between social performance, use of material culture, and what remains of that relationality in the hotel today. The next slide. Yes. So here's what I'm trying to get at. These are two scenes. On the left is what an archaeological reconstruction strives to get. This scene from late Stone Age culture, for example, in Europe and in England. But the next scene, there is something wrong there. This is an introduction of new material culture. One of those ancient men, an ancient culture where there is a piano. That piano is out of context with that particular setting. My idea is that many paranormal investigators introduce new technologies that were not known, and that creates a problem that prevents communication. My idea is that in an investigation, in what we call performance excavations, we are trying to identify with them and be identified as them, as one of them, by not introducing new technologies. And these two contrasts between these two different scenarios, these two settings, one that is context specific and one that is not context specific, introducing something that was not part of the culture, illustrates that difference between residents and non-residents. So that's what I'm trying to get at, this idea of resonance that you see in the right side through time. Now, why the Springs? Okay, why a modern contemporary hotel spa complex? So in a paper titled Toward a Sociological Parapsychology, Robin Wolfett, hopefully I pronounced his name correctly, presents an approach to anomalous experiences that draw upon methods from sociology. In that paper, he proposed the following, the next. Anomalous experiences occur to people as they are enmeshed in a range of cultural, social, and interpersonal activities. And I'm saying cultural, social, and interpersonal activities through time, and from the past to the present, manifesting, from the present to the past, recreating those cultural, social, interpersonal activities. That they are inextricably implicated in precisely the social processes and context which cannot be reproduced in laboratory conditions. They have to be reproduced in the field at that specific location using specific relevant information, social and cultural and technological and material information from particular layers of socio-temporal order in the history of occupations of each haunted location, which would differ from place to place. That these psi-related experiences have a geographical dimension. The geographical dimension that I am using is a contemporary modern hotel spa complex. And see if I got not just ghosts who are attached and embedded because of unforeseen circumstances, but revenants who come back because of the unique experiences that they had at the hotel. So, according to Robin, the key to understanding these phenomena may lie in hitherto overlooked spatial and geodemographic conditions, the returning guest at a modern hotel, and occur among a designated population, hotel guests. So, my question is this. Are many paranormal investigations ignoring certain locations, and are their investigative practices at many locations untimely or out of time with the past social history of many of these haunted sites? Does this out of time create no communication with these returning guests? Particularly, does it avoids the manifestation, I suggest, a particular localized haunting micro histories indigenous to each haunted site? So for our project guidelines, we have added additional information to Robin's statements, ones that we are using in the development of hypothesis about haunted phenomenon in a specific localized setting. Now, next slide. If it comes up. Okay, these are other views of the hotel. You can see it's very, very, very extensive and very, very large. There are over 240 rooms in that hotel. Get to where it says if we leave signature traces. Okay, right here, Mary. So if we leave signature traces in the places we have occupied, shouldn't places which humans returned again and again, like hotel guests, leave residual footprints of their particular interactional practices? Is this residual presence the initial eco-cultural formation process in a location's haunted character? That's something we're thinking about. Second, if these individuals return again and again to a particular place, is the memory of that place more affording to a return as afterlife presence rather than a ghostly presence attached, trapped there due to a traumatic experience, situation, or event? Does this type of revenant haunting, the return, become a form of profane normality rather than paranormality? So these are some of the ideas we're thinking about. So our Staging Afterlife Project adds to the sociological lead of Robin by including the disciplines of anthropology, archaeology, and performance studies to the mix of investigative field practices. Owen Davis, in his Social History of Ghosts, stated the following: to a significant extent, tourism now defines where ghosts are seen. You are better off looking for them on the tourist trail, like a modern hotel. More specifically, links to travel, heritage, and the architecture of modernity may lead to a unique, informative mode of investigating hauntings as revenant guests. As an archaeologist and anthropologist and / actor, I have been immersed for more than 45 years in ruined settings, both archaeological and theatrical. It is within this mode of perception that the Staging Afterlife Project was conceived, yet still a project within what archaeologist Shannon Dottie in 2016 calls profane archaeologists, but not to all archaeologists. So this is why we specifically chose the Bedford Springs Hotel Spa in Bedford, Pennsylvania, USA as our project location, because management does not make the mention of ghosts there into a desirable lodger, as Owen Davies said in his book. The hotel does not serve as a place that is marketed as haunted and a focus of ghost tourism, even though reports of eerie experiences frequently are reported there by guests. I had to go through all kind of arguments to get the hotel to allow me to do the haunted history tours there, to do investigations there, because the hotel management didn't want the hotel to be known as a place that may be haunted. So it was very difficult to get this investigation, this project into place. And it's still very difficult, as I have to use my time, because the hotel is still occupied by guests all the time. So we have to really use our activity there when there's less flow of contemporary guests, so we can do our investigation, so we can do our research. So that's why it's taking a lot of time to do this gathering of information and to create some scenarios, test these scenarios, create our hypothesis, test the hypothesis, redo the hypothesis because of what is happening. So again, but to me, it's worth it, because I think this is something very, very different than your traditional location, different haunted location, a different type of guest. So at Bedford Springs, we combine the idea of a rationality between travel, heritage, and the architecture of modernity to investigate the possibility of a revenant guest who returns to the hotel because of the unique experiences they had there and not some untimely death. Our baseline for investigative work there is, this is important, the host ghost ecological pattern configuration, frequently used in site-specific performance theater. The host is the original physical environment. The original physical environment before the Springs was built, before the hotel was built there, was a virgin forest. It was said that in Pennsylvania, before the colonization of the colony in the early colonial period, a squirrel could climb one of the trees in the easternmost part of Pennsylvania and traverse over 300 miles of forested cover without ever touching the ground in the western part of Pennsylvania. The Bedford Springs Hotel and Spa is located surrounded by this forested area. And it was a very sacred place to 3 Native American indigenous tribes who thought of these springs as very sacred waters, and they performed a lot of ceremonies there. So that is what is the virgin environment, the host environment. So the ghosts are the people who, well, the ghost is the hotel. The hotel is a haunted location because it was not indigenous to that virgin host environment. The hotel is the ghost environment, the ghost place, and the guests who come to that place are human ghosts, living ghosts, because we have a difference between the host site, which is the original physical environment, and what is brought to the site in time. The hotel being built there, guests coming to the hotel during various periods in the history of the hotel. Those would be all ghostly presences who come to that site. So that's the configuration, the host and the ghost. The host is the original virgin environment, and what is brought to the site in terms of architecture and in terms of presence are all ghostly presences of live individuals. Okay, so I'm going to get to an expansion of that idea. Thus, there may be different signature traces that occur in particular spaces of that haunted ghost setting of the hotel, depending upon the spatial functionality through time and different layers of socio-temporal order representing different experiences and memories, which may create, I propose, a specific and localized haunted character of the location. So I'm going to skip through some of this. And now, so in this host ghost complex, this ecological pattern configuration, we at the hotel as investigators are defining and seeking context-specific information on 3 haunted phases with perhaps multiple layers of presence in each of these haunted phases at the hotel. The first is residual ghostly imprints, the imprints of layered cultural site occupations, Native American, colonial, Victorian, and modern. Twice behaved behaviors, the interactive manifestation of presence as original ghostly presence who first come to occupy the host environment, and those who return as revenant guests who have twice behaved behaviors, their original behavior as live presences and their return to the hotel who also do those same activities that they did when they were alive, twice behaved behaviors. And the third is thrice behaved behaviors, our modern presence as a form of performance excavation where we simulate those behaviors, twice behaved, and those original live performances. So the returning guest who return as an afterlife presence see us as one of them from their time period and not as strangers who are different than them. Now, let me show you something here. Yeah, they show that. Now, I don't know if you can see this. This was taken at 1 o'clock in the morning on one of the most horrific battlefields of the American Civil War in the United States, the Antietam battlefield. On September 17th, 1862, 26,000 casualties occurred on this battlefield in one day. We were in there trying to investigate the presence of soldiers who are still there. Again, this is not the positive haunting. This is they're there because they died untimely deaths. So we were there at 1:30 till 1:30 in the morning. This photograph was taken by that Mike Stevenson that I talked about at the beginning, our ghost tech guy. And this is at 1:30 in the morning at Burnside Bridge. The National Park Service superintendent, a man who did not believe in hauntings, was there observing our investigations. We took this photograph right at Burnside Bridge, the most horrific part of the battlefield, where in the historical literature, we had 5 Union assaults that came toward that bridge and they were being repulsed time and again. And the second and third assaults toward the bridge were slipping and sliding over the bodies of previous dead soldiers and blood strewn all over the place. That comes directly from the historical narrative. Mike went over there, and while we were resting between scenarios, he took a photograph of that scenario that was described as horrific with all those bodies and blood. And this was what he got. To us, and this is not a clear picture, the original picture was a lot clearer. That looks like when it was originally seen by us and the National Park Service ranger, looks like a jogger in shorts. And that jogger in shorts was not there on the battlefield at 1:30 in the morning, confirmed by us and the National Park Service ranger. So this was imprinted on the environment because it was different than the historical presence of the Civil War. So his imprint as a habitual act of jogging on the battlefield during the day suppressed past historical presence that may still have been there and created a new living modern presence. This is what I think is happening in paranormal investigations at haunted locations. By not resonating with what happened there in the past, they are creating new, contemporary, modern, living hauntings and suppressing the past by creating this type of presence, modern presence. Okay. Now, we don't have much time, so I'm skipping over a lot of this other stuff, but I will talk about this during the conference as much as I can get in. I have about 6 more pages, but let me get down to the key concepts at the end. So in our initial Staging Afternoon project, I'm interested in localized histories, not para-histories that appear to be similar from one site to another, irregardless of local, cultural, and social and technological histories. I'm looking at trying to define layers of socio-temporal order, a sociology of time that integrates past practices and past materiality into a configuration that still appears as a haunting at this site at the hotel. I'm looking at social practices and material cultural entanglements at the hotel. I'm interested in patina, the sense of pastness at the hotel. What remains physically of the past at the hotel, those dual staircases, that historic furniture, historic photographs at the hotel. I'm interested in historical experiences of contemporary guests, not para-histories of abnormalities in the environment. I'm interested in acousmatic sounds, initial recordings of sound when we did a walkthrough of the hotel that we could not define as to a particular identity or agency, and then look at the different functionalities of the different spaces of the hotel through time and try to put a context to these sounds that we recorded. And we have gotten some of those contexts. I'll talk about those at the conference. The idea of the revenant guest cultural haunting, a returning guest who comes back for positive reasons because of the unique experiences that they've had at the hotel. The concept of guestscape as individual haunting. I would assume that every place that you visit might leave some signature trace. So if those signature traces would differ from place to place that you have visited or lived. So that means if you haunt these places, your haunting would differ from site to site. So a good example of that is if you have Anne Boleyn seen in various locations throughout the UK, at Hampton Court, at her castle in Kent. But I would think that her behavior or her manifesting behavior would differ from Hampton Court and her castle in Kent because her memory and experiences would differ from each site. And this is what I get as a individual haunting, not an individual haunting. Very haunting narrative intelligibility, where you have in the history of ghost stories at a place like Bedford Springs, you got a context in space that is place specific that includes micro histories, which are part of these layers of socio-temporal order. So during the conference, in 30 minutes, I'm going to try to compress a lot of these ideas, give you some more photographs, give you some more ideas about what we're still doing in this preliminary information gathering phase. So I guess I'm running out of time, I guess. So I'm going to leave it at that and see if I can answer some questions if you have it.
John, thank you so much. That was a very interesting talk, I think, on behalf of the other listeners that we have with us this evening. I think you've hit a few key points that some of us investigators and researchers try to strive for ourselves. Just give me 2 seconds while I open up the chat. I think going back to some of the first comments that I knew that was coming in from people, and you were talking about how to interact with the spirits using historical and factual information. Is that called the Singapore experiment, where you?
I've been doing it now for at least 30 years. So, and then one day I go up and say, everybody's talking about the Singapore thing. Well, I've been doing it a lot before that, but if they want to call it that, that's fine with me. But I'm a lot more, because I really immersed myself into the character. I studied method acting for 2 years with one of the persons who trained the great actors like Robert De Niro, Marlon Brando and stuff. So I really immerse myself in that character, and I don't get out of that character. So, and I don't use any technology that they would not know from that period of time. So if you want to call it the Singapore, that's fine with me, but I've been doing it for a very, very long time. But you can call it what you want. But yeah, that's a good example of that. But I think this is a little bit more immersive. I'm not saying it's better. It's just a little bit more immersive, because I'm actually using a very immersive characterization based on my training as a method actor.
That's fantastic to hear. Just so that you know that not all of us are like you see on TV, going chasing and calling out to empty rooms. Tomorrow night, our team are going to an event, and we've got all of the clothing to wear in an old jailhouse. So it goes all the way back to the Victorian, and even older than that as well. So we're going to immerse ourselves fully, dressing up in the period clothing. So think of us tomorrow night, and we'll talk a little bit more at conference about any of the evidence that we might get from it. So yes, I'm totally for heritage, history, and gathering information of the building as well.
I love to come to Great Britain, because there's so much history, and you can do all of these type of immersions and all these different type of locations, and develop it differently from place to place, depending upon what happened there in the past of particular potential ghost. You would do that reenactment or that re-immersion differently, depending upon what happened to them in that particular place. So that's why I just love to go to England, because there's just so much history and so much things we can do over there. What I base this stuff on when I talk about typical paranormal investigation is what we see here in the United States among paranormal investigators, not necessarily what's going on over there. So I hope nobody got offended by mentioning the
Absolutely not. No, absolutely not. We're loving hearing the different sides of the investigative research that people take. So we're open to everybody's ideas and thoughts, and nobody would be feeling anything different than that. So please don't think that. And also, I'd like to extend for myself, if you're going to come to England, come and visit. I've got a room. The two of you are very welcome, and we'll show you some of the lovely areas. We're not too far from Glastonbury, so that will be enjoyable for you.
Greg, we really appreciate that. We have some friends over there. We every time we go over there, we get to see them, and a lot of them are in ASSAP. So we like to go back there, because I really have a lot of respect for the cultural heritage of England and Britain. And I do have, through DNA analysis, I found out that I do have family in Cornwall, which is one of my favorite places.
Yeah, not too far from us. I'm south of the country as well, so it's a very beautiful part of the country. But
my bucket list is to go to Tintagel. But I've never
very
been.
nice, very nice. There's a beautiful castle there as well, which is allegedly haunted. And they do midweek breaks for a fantastic price as well. So yeah, definitely worth a visit. But looking at the time, John and Mary, we'll just see if we can kick through some of these questions that's coming up for you guys. Kieran Farrell kicked off first of all and said, I agree. I think this was to do with calling out the heritage and taking that into consideration. He says, in